Hello, everybody. Good to see you. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Congratulations for the new center. This panel is focusing more on the role of the leaders, and we are hearing today about remarkable leaders and great leaders that play the role. And in my research and also in my courses, I'm dealing with different conflict zones. And it's clear that you can talk about some of the most well-known peace processes without talking about the importance of the leaders. You can't understand Israel-Egypt peacemaking without talking about Anwar Sadat, without talking about Begin. Of course, South Africa breakthrough without talking about Nelson Mandela and the cloud, and also Northern Ireland. I know that you'll talk in the next panel without talking about Jerry Adams or John Hume and others. But as we know, in many conflicts, in many stages, this is not the case. We don't have this kind of leadership. We have a different condition. So that's why in some cases, we need a different type of leaders or different types of actors. And actually, in my presentation, I will talk about my research about the unofficial actors in conflict resolution and what I call in my book the private peace entrepreneurs, the private peacemakers. And when we are looking on the history of different conflict zones, different regions, different stages, we can see that these kind of actors that I will define in a minute actually played a critical role in different conflict resolution processes. But actually, many of them were excluded from the history textbook, and usually they didn't receive the attention they deserve in the literature that is focusing on, of course, the official leaders, the official channels, the official diplomacy. So I will try a little bit to shed light on these actors, and I will start maybe with the definition. Okay, so the private peace entrepreneurs, as I define it, actually based on 4 elements. First of all, I'm talking about private citizen with no official authority whatsoever to outline, to conduct foreign policy, to negotiate with the other side. Nobody nominated them, nobody elected them, what we call self-appointed diplomat. And second, they belong to the disputing side. So I'm talking about actors from the conflict, not external actors coming to interfere. They're actually part of the conflict. And they create channels of communication with officials from the other side of the conflict. And the goal is to promote a process of conflict resolution, peacemaking, and reconciliation. And of course, this can be done in different stages. It can be done in the pre-negotiation stage, during negotiation, or conflict transformation, or reconciliation. So, and this is, of course, connected to a very interesting development in the theoretical literature. I will very briefly on that. But just to say that we can see, especially since the end of the Cold War, that more and more scholars are writing about the changes in the diplomatic landscape, the emergence of new actors, that we have the private diplomats, unofficial diplomats, citizen diplomats, claiming that the official diplomat no longer have the monopoly that they used to have for many years. And at the same time, of course, it's also relevant to the track 2 diplomacy that's referring to a wide spectrum of meetings, activities between private citizens in different sides of the conflict, trying to assist the track 1, and this is the official track 1 diplomacy. And it's actually also related to a, I think, fascinating trend that we can see in the peace building literature in recent years, that this is what we call the local term. To focus more on the role of the local peace building, local peacemakers, not just the international actors, the external actors, the international institution, but also about the potential role of the local actors in the conflict zone and how they contribute. And this is, of course, very relevant for our research. Okay, so of course, one of the biggest maybe puzzles that I had in my research dealing with these actors is the question of their authority and the power resources. Because eventually we are talking about private citizens. They don't have the official authority, the political, economic, military resources that states have or international organizations have. So the question is, what are their alternative unofficial resources that eventually enable them to try to make an influence and to try to make an impact on conflict resolution? So in my research, I identified a few important types of resources. I will just mention some of them and also use some case study. So the first one is resources of knowledge and expertise. And here, the fact that they have this ongoing dialogue with officials from the other side for many years. In some of the cases I'm talking about, it's actually decades. It can provide them with very unique and important resources of knowledge and expertise that sometimes can be even better than the official resources and the official actors that don't have this knowledge, especially when you don't have official relation between the parties that even don't recognize one another. So they are maybe sometimes the only one that actually are talking with the other side. Just to mention one case that I mentioned in my book, Susan Massey, you can see in the picture, an American writer, and she was an expert on Russian history, Russian culture, and she visited Russia frequently. She had a lot of networks. I'm not talking about the 80s, including a close connection to people that were close to Gorbachev officials. And at some point, the Reagan administration, again, peak moment, of course, in the Cold War, started to consult with her, and she had an influence on trying to change the perception of Reagan about the Soviet Union, and also to use her to exchange messages between the Soviet Union and the US, of course, between Reagan and Gorbachev. And it was mainly, an important part of it was her knowledge and expertise working on this issue for many years. Another type is resources of access and context that these kind of actors have on both sides of the conflict to decision makers or to power circles. And this can actually give them some kind of a unique position, that there are access and contacts on both sides to leaders on both sides. And that can be very helpful in order to try to promote some kind of a conflict resolution or peacemaking. And we are talking a lot about Germany. So this is another historical case of Albert Berlin, a German businessman, Jewish, that actually was on the one hand, because of his very successful businesses, was very close to the German Kaiser, Wilhelm, but at the same time, he had also very good contact in London with the British decision makers. So during the years before the First World War, he was very concerned with the growing tension between the countries, the naval arms race. So he actually tried to use the fact that he had contacts on both sides in Berlin and in London to try to bring the parties together to negotiate how to end the naval arms race and to try to improve the relation. And at some point, he even succeeded to bring the parties to negotiate, but of course it failed and he couldn't prevent the war. But this was actually a remarkable effort. Thanks. And another type is resources of what we could call moral and spiritual authority that these kind of actors have that can be very useful. We can distinguish between what we can call intellectual authority, and I'm talking in my book about different academic private peace entrepreneurs. One of them is from South Africa, Professor Willie Asterhaus, that was engaged during the late 80s in an unofficial dialogue with leaders from the ANC, the African National Congress, especially Thabo Mbeki. And at the same time, he was reporting officials in the government, officials in the establishment, talking about different ideas, talking about different models, how to move to democracy and peace in South Africa. And again, the status that he has as an intellectual authority that is connected to the academic, not to politics, actually really helped him to get influence on the official establishment and to try to bridge between the parties, leading eventually to official negotiation with the ANC. And we are talking a lot, of course, about the religious authority and the fact that they can use religious resources, they can use their reputation. And I mentioned in the book a lot of cases of religious private peace entrepreneurs, leaders. One of them is from Mozambique, Archbishop Jaime Gonzalez, that actually as a religious leader was able to gain trust from both parties, Renamo and the government and the Renamo organization, in the conflict in Mozambique, the beginning of the 90s, leading to the peace agreement in 92 and helping them to negotiate and to mediate during this negotiation. And just another type, we can mention that it's what we can call tactical power resource and instrumental power resources. The fact that they are private citizens can actually sometimes can give them some kind of advantages. They can be much more flexible and informal, and they can go from one place to another without the media knowledge, without the public knowledge. And they have a lot, different from the officials that have a lot of limitation or official diplomats, they can actually have the power of deniability. That they can say to the leaders, I will do my kind of activities and effort, and you have, if it will leak, if it will fail, you can always distance yourself. You can say, I have nothing to do with it. It's all big private citizen. If it will work, you can always use it as an official tool. And this is, of course, something that is different from official diplomats, that we can do that with these kind of actors. And maybe just for conclusion, I will say that these kind of actors I found can actually be active and can contribute in different conflicts and actually in different stages, as I said. And I identify different kinds of how they can also have influence and impact on conflict resolution and contribution. So I can say that, for example, in some of the cases, they played as private local mediators between the parties. A very interesting case also in one of my case studies in my book is Brendan Daddy. You can see the picture from London, from London Derry, from Northern Ireland. And he was actually a secret back channel between the British government and the IRA for 20 years. Nobody knew about it. Also, people in his family I interviewed had no idea about it. Only later on, after the peace agreement, it was revealed. And he actually played a role in trying to create trust between the parties, especially at the beginning of the 90s before the official peace process. So he was doing the stages, the pre-negotiation stage. But also they can have an influence on the public opinion in trying to change the perception, trying to change what we call the enemy image. And another case I'm talking about in my book is Uri Avneri, an Israeli journalist that actually was starting to engage in dialogue with the PLO during the 70s, during the 80s, when it was completely a taboo. It even was against the law at some point. And he was also the editor of a newspaper that was very popular, Ha'olam Hazeh. So he actually used this newspaper in order to report about this meeting, in order to try to change the public opinion, to change perception about the PLO. And you can see here also an example, but there are also other types of how they can influence. Sometimes they can promote some kind of crisis management. They can bring different ideas and models that can later move to the official sphere. And I would just say at the same time that there are, of course, a lot of problems and challenges with these kind of activities, these kind of actors, and a lot of criticism that we can hear against them. Maybe just to mention some of the main arguments that usually we'll hear, that first of all, they are unprofessional amateurs, they don't have the tools, they don't have the training to deal with such a sensitive issues of war and peace. There is the argument that they're undermining the ability of a government to conduct a unified policy. If the government is saying we will not talk with X, these private citizens go behind their back and doing it, and they also don't have legitimacy and do not represent anyone. They're just private citizens. So I would just say that also part of my research was the discussion on this argument, and I interviewed many cases of private peace entrepreneurs. Some of the counter argument that I heard from them was that they are not trying to pretend that they are officials. Everybody know that they are private citizens. Everybody know that they are private actors. They are just trying to fill the diplomatic vacuum and to try to contribute. And actually, government can use that in different stages. And it's not just their right, it's also their duty as citizens living in this conflict to try to do whatever they can. And also talking about that they don't have the tools, they claim that sometimes, as I mentioned, they have other advantages and other information and other tools that maybe can be even better than the official diplomat, and that can be very useful. And just the last point, I will say that it's important, of course, to distinguish between different cases. Some of them in some cases it can work, some cases it can fail. It failed, but of course, eventually I found that in many conflicts, I'm talking about Israel-Palestine, Northern Ireland, South Africa, Vietnam War, I found that these actors played as what I call the diplomatic avant-garde. They created the first step, the first contact with the other side, and actually paving the way later on for officials to move, to get inside and to start official process. But they were the one who created the first step when it was still ongoing conflict and the political parties were not ready yet to do it.
Lior, I wanted to ask you if you dealt with the case of Nahum Goldman, because Nahum Goldman, in the case of Israel-Germany relations, and later on with his initiative with Egypt, it's played it's a fascinating example. He held an official position as the head of the World Jewish Congress, but still he was sent by Israel, or he sent himself conversations and meeting with Adenauer to advance the relations between Israel and Germany. And sometimes when the Israel used him, and when Ben-Gurion didn't like what he did, he said, well, you are a private citizen. I didn't allow you to do it. But from time to time, he used him. When he was convinced to him, it was good to use him. And then there was, of course, a real scandal between the relations between him and Golda Meir. And yes, this is a fascinating example.
Yeah. I would just say that usually in the longer presentation here, I use a cartoon that is actually exactly Goldman and Golda.
Okay.
When she's saying, I have my own phone, I don't need your phone, I don't need that you will call because I have my own official channels. But this is fascinating case because he's moving from some kind of official, not official, but both they're working as part of the Zionist project at some stages. And then you have this clash between the official Israeli government, especially the Golda Meir, that's what the point.
When they don't like what you do.
Exactly. And she also
you're a private citizen.
She said in the Knesset, you are not here, you need to come here to see our life here, and then you can try to interfere. And there was a serious clash between them. He also met with Arafat and also went to Morocco, and he had Joe Golan that was doing his work with the Arab countries.
When Ben-Gurion didn't like what he did, so he said, you are the wandering Jew.
It was the case, by the way, also with Magnus. It also did whatever he wanted, and Ben-Gurion didn't like it.
I had another question that I wrote down regarding private peace entrepreneurs, and there is this concept of symbolic politics trap, where you have leaders that are stuck in their own narrative, and that at one point, like maybe even Arafat, he couldn't go back to say, yeah, these enemies we have, maybe they're not so bad. eventually. And so maybe I thought that also here we have these private peacemakers that can go between the lines, that can maybe also, like, easier shift from one side to the other, that are not that stuck in an official narrative that they propose to the public over and over and over again. So yeah, I wanted to ask whether this is like one kind of strategy to create common ground between narratives as a non-official person.
So yeah, I think when we are talking about the official leaders comparing to the private actors, the official leaders, of course, have the public opinion. We are talking about the two-level game. They always need to think about their own public opinion, their own political incentive and consideration. And we know that in many cases, leaders have political incentive not to do this kind of things. We talked about public opposition to different processes. We have a leader that was murdered not far away from here because peacemaking process. We know there are a lot of political incentive not to do that. So what these private actors can do is actually to try to bridge between the current situation that you still have the enemy image, the ethos of conflict, and all of this public perception until there will be a political rightness, and to try to work in between and to try to go to the leaders and to say, this is the reports that I received from the other side, that it's actually, there are changes there. And I can say that I talked about Uri Avneri. So when Rabin was prime minister in the 70s, his first term, he was against talking with the PLO at that point, of course. But when Avneri approached him, he said, please give me these reports. I was always happy to hear that. Some leaders were, of course, against it. At some point, even people like Avi Natan went to jail just because of that. But there are some leaders, also, by the way, Kennedy was like this, and others that always use these kind of private actors to say, the official diplomacy, we are not going to do it because it's too provocative, it's too sensitive. But it's nice that you have these private actors doing this work. If they will see, if I will get new messages, new information, maybe I can then move to the official track.
You said that the role of U.S. public opinion was very important. I read some books regarding my PhD thesis that actually said that it was just an overestimation of U.S. influence, and that actually the U.S. focused way more on the Cold War and to have a strong West Germany, and not so much that the actual U.S. public was that interested in what Germany did. So also here we see Nahum Goldman, how he tried to do the first steps towards Germany, and that Adenauer promised him in the hand to pay reparations without even consulting his finance minister. So there, maybe we also have this point of different times back then. He haven't had a foreign minister. He just did decisions on his own, and then sometimes he needs to stick to them, even though he wouldn't like to want to. So, however, what I wanted to ask is how you see this this role of public opinion in the U.S. and generally of the allies to form the German-Israeli coalition, or whether it was also some kind of misconception from the part of Germany in the beginning to not have the possibility to go back.
What is your explanation in terms of Adenauer position, personality, that he objected so much to the apology, to taking responsibility, and what is the larger frame of these policies of the head?
The answer is that it wasn't so much Adenauer that he wasn't ready to apologize, but he spoke in the name of the Germans, and he knew that the Germans are so much against it. You know that when the opinion polls in Germany after the reparation agreements showed that most of the Germans in West Germany were against paying the Jews money, and they were dealing with their own sufferings, what the Allies did to us and what the Soviets did to us. So he knew that the public opinion is very much against, and he told in a very famous meeting with Sharet wanted when they signed the reparation agreement in Luxembourg, Sharet came with a statement which he wanted to make. And after Adenauer read it, he said, "We are not going to say we're not going to tell it because this is something that I can hear, but the German won't be able to hear it." They don't want to hear it. And so this is one thing. The second is, as I explained, Adenauer was a nation builder, like Ben-Gurion. He wanted to integrate all parts of the German society. And there were a lot of Nazis. And many of the Germans supported Hitler. Most of the Germans supported, it was a myth. Most of the Germans supported Hitler. But he wanted, to build a nation. So he knew that he needed all those Germans who supported Hitler, and they want now to give that it will be a beginning, a new beginning. So Stunde Null, what they call it. Now it's a new beginning in Germany. So let us forget. So on the one hand, he was ready to pay and support Israel, but the condition was for Israel, let us forget the past. Let us all only think about the present and the future. We know we took responsibility. We did take responsibility. We didn't deny the Holocaust, and this is the beginning. But let us concentrate on the present and the future. And in this, he found an ally, Ben-Gurion, who also was a very constructive leader who thought about the present. He said, Ben-Gurion said, I'm not dealing with the past. I'm dealing with what is happening today. I'm using the past. This is the policy of using the past from our benefit, for the benefit of the state of Israel.
I would like to say that politics of memory started. Oh, yes, now it's nice. Thank you very much. Politics of memory in the Federal Republic, I think it started only during the 60s. And until then, we had much more difficulties with this. And in difference, perhaps, to the situation of Adenauer and Ben-Gurion, with Adenauer and...
I'm using the phrase Vergangenheitspolitik, which Professor Frey used, in order to characterize the situation in Germany. The attitude of the German establishment to how to integrate the society using the past or ignoring the past.
In your study, what were the driving forces behind these concrete men or women who we saw on the screen? And looking for the future, do you expect the emergence of emergence of similar personalities in the near future concerning different conflicts?
Yeah, so I must say that when I was working on all of these cases, and really eventually I created a data of something like 40 cases, I started from this conflict and moved into different conflicts, as I mentioned. It's always a question of what pushing these individuals, because some of them really devoted 20, 30, Brendan Daddy that I mentioned, like almost 30 years of his life was devoted to this issue. Uri Avneri, 30. So some of these people and they failed and failed and failed in many of the cases. They have some success, but in many. So it's clear that part of it is also the question of motivation. So I'm not dealing with psychology. I don't have the ability maybe to deal with that, but I try to identify some elements that you can find in all of them. I found, first of all, the question of optimism was really, really strong in all of them. You can see that even in the worst situation and conflict and war, there was still truly believe that first, that it can be changed, that conflict can be resolved, and second, that they can help, that they can contribute. Most of the people that think living in conflict think that this is like earthquake, this nothing we can do. They believe it can be changed and that they can do, and they have a lot of sense of mission from different reasons. Some of them religious, some of them secular, some of them more believe that they are global citizens, some of them more nationalist, but all of them have this sense of mission that they need to do it. And they also have they don't have trust in the official establishment. They don't believe that their governments can do that, or they don't want, or they can. And also they have a different relation with the other side, mainly from young age. I found that in most of the cases, since from being young, they already met the other side. So they don't have what enemy image and what we call the perception of the other side. Brendan Daddy was from a mixed neighborhood, for example. Uri Avnei was working with Arabs already, he was starting very young. So all of these people have already a different perception from these people. What?
Independent work.
Yeah. And they're also very individual, by the way. It's also very work with them. It's a very people that are they want to do it. They believe that they have the wall. It's also something that it will be difficult for others to work with them.
Do we have any records how they dealt with the situation? What did they say? Did any of these people write books or recollected? What did they say when they had the other party in front of them? I mean, their methods. Did they describe in any place their methods? What did they use? No.
So I would just say that in general there are different types, as I mentioned, using different strategies. Some of them are actually doing very public activities, like Uri Avner, everything to show also Abi Natan taking a plane and going to Egypt one day in the 60s. And the main goal is to influence the public opinion. And then they are trying to push the other side to make a public gesture mainly. But sometimes they are actually secret private peace entrepreneurs, like I mentioned, Bernard Daddy. And then they are working secretly, nobody knows about it. And then the messages to the other side is to try to deliver messages to the other side, to try to convince them to change their policy and to help them to give messages to the official government in their side. I would just say that some of them, as I said, public, and then they also publish a lot of book about their activity. And some of them, many people, that's why I mentioned, they're excluded from the history because we don't know. And also when I'm looking for archives, some of them, when I came to there, he said, I don't have an archive. Eventually, he actually created an archive. You can find it today in Jerusalem, but they're not maybe aware that what they're doing also diplomacy. They're just doing what they think they should do.
Conclusions, the results, most of them failed, or percentage, how many succeeded, and can you give us, I mean, just for that will be optimistic, can you give us an example of people who succeeded?
So first of all, I tried not to use the word success in my. So for me, if they have some kind of an impact, that was the main question. If, for example, somebody is using the other side to deliver messages, for me, it means that they had an impact on the official because they moved to the official channels and they are using them. Even the case of Gershon Baskin, for example, that they used as part of the official channel with Hamas about Gilad Shalit that was being captured. And at some point, I talked with David Meidan. He was responsible from the Mossad for the negotiation. At some point, all the official mediators just collapsed. The Egyptian was not there. The German was not there. So he said, I need someone to talk to deliver messages to Hamas. And then Gershon Baskin is there. He had a channel that was working for many years. And then he was able to use it. So I'm not sure if it's success or not, but it had some impact on the official sphere. And then I was looking on different ways how they have it official. It can be by using them to deliver messages, by having influence on the public opinion, by moving ideas. The idea of Hudna, for example, initiative started as an unofficial initiative, moving to the official. Also, by the way, started as two academics that started an unofficial channel, leading eventually to official, but they have very good relation with the official. So we can say that eventually we can see that in many cases, at least they can have an official channel. Maybe they will not turn to be an official diplomat, or the case of Oslo is really one case that really started an unofficial move to official, but in many cases, they can have a dramatic influence in different stages, especially by the way of negotiation.
Is it perhaps possible to think about the term of leadership today in modern societies? I think there's a big difference between leadership at the times of Adenauer, de Gaulle, Ben-Gurion, and so on, and today. And so I would ask you, what do you think, what do you think about the term of leadership and also of the term of interstate reconciliation? Because in the modern conflicts, we have different groups in conflict and not only states and groups within the conflicts. And that, I think, so it will be much more difficult today as in after the Second World War.
First of all, I think it's really a question of leadership. It's pity that we don't have now leaders like Ben-Gurion. I can say it as an Israeli citizen. It's really pity. But also maybe we can think about the era. I mean, it was the post-war era. And the West was looking, I mean, there was this new conflict with the Soviet Union. They were the enemy now. And they were looking for how to unite the West. So, I mean, Adenauer and the Gaulle, Adenauer and Ben-Gurion, because Adenauer thought about Israel as a fortress of the West against the Soviet influence in the Middle East. So they have this, I mean, they have this need to go, I mean, to solve problems and to find way for reconciliation between themselves. I mean, they will be able to stand against the new enemy. So I think this is I think one of the main, or probably we should take it as a main motivation for the reconciliation. The need to reconcile, to build the new Europe, to build the new West against the East.
You have motivation, but do we have today, the leaders today have also the possibility? I think that will be the question, not only the motivation, because the scope of action of the leaders today is much more difficult. And for example, we have actually the current president, Emmanuel Macron in France. He is very engaged concerning Europe, European integration, European cooperation, and Franco-German relationship. And in his first legislature, he has done very much to reinforce the German-Franco cooperation. But it was very difficult for him. And in his second legislature, he has no more majority in his parliament, and it is much more difficult. And so we have structures in modern societies which have as consequence that the prerequisites for leadership is much more difficult.